We're less than a week away from Canada's 45th election. Which way will it go? Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. There's been a lot said about this election, most consequential in modern history, and it could be for the Conservatives. They had been sailing along with a 30-plus point lead on the Liberals for, well, more than a year. All they needed was an election. But politics can turn on a dime, and that first term was Justin Trudeau stepping down. Secondly, Trudeau was replaced by Mark Carney, and a dramatic shift unfolded. Our unpublished vote question asks, which party will you vote for in the upcoming election? You can log on and vote right now, and don't forget to email your MP afterwards using our tool to let them know why you think what you do. All comments on the unpublished.ca website will be entered into a draw for a one-year membership to unpublished.ca. Coming up on the show, we'll chat with Marvin Ryder of McMaster and Richard Johnson at UBC. But first, I'm pleased to be joined by Andrew Enns, Executive Vice President of Leger. And Andrew, how would you characterize this election campaign so far?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think all the action and all the fun stuff in terms of from a pollster's perspective, the shifting of opinions, all of that actually happened before the election, as you sort of rightly introduced. I mean, the departure of Mr. Trudeau, the arrival of Mr. Carney, and the big thing, President Trump's tariffs and aggressions with respect to Canada really upended the public opinion environment. And when we launched this campaign, the Liberals were just creeping into the lead. They opened up a sizable lead, early in the campaign, and it's been from a polling perspective, Leger's been in every week in field, and it's been fairly stable. The Conservatives largely playing catch up, and they have been playing a bit of catch up the last couple of weeks, but it's actually been remarkably steady as it goes. Still with some very interesting storylines in it, of course.
Mm-hmm. What are your latest numbers so far?
So we've got some polling that'll be out by the time this hits the airwaves. The Liberals will be at 43%, the Conservatives at 39% nationally, the NDP at 8%, and that represents from a week ago a slight narrowing of the lead. It was 5 points a week ago. It's now 4. 2 weeks ago, we had a 7-point lead. So, as I said, the Conservatives are making up a little bit of ground, but it's slow, and the end of the runway is coming up pretty fast.
It seemed that removing Trudeau or Trudeau removing himself changed everything. Did the Conservatives not plan for a possible change? And, is that to their detriment that they haven't planned for that?
Well, I really think, in fairness, it's a combination. And obviously, Trudeau's departure dropped the anger that I think was fueling some of that Conservative vote demonstrably. But I think the other thing that really coincided, I mean, literally within days of Trudeau announcing his retirement, was the first sort of consistent missives from President, still not even, he was President-elect Trump at the time. He wasn't even sworn in yet, but he started going on about the 51st state and Governor Trudeau and his tariff threats, and that really, the Trudeau thing, not to downplay it, but the Trump factor and the tariffs and the threats on our economic and, quite frankly, our territorial sovereignty really changed the dynamic and instilled this nationalistic, patriotic fervor in the voters. And that's when that trajectory, and honestly, Mark Carney, kind of the right man at the right time for a lot of Canadians in terms of his pedigree and resume.
When we look at the numbers, you would just outline your latest, and it seems everybody is sort of solidifying what they hold. So it's all about the undecided. Who are the undecided, and what are they looking for right now?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. The undecided, it's not a huge population, anywhere between 10, probably 12%, sort of where our polling's tracking it at. They do tend to be sort of those voters under the age of 55, certainly kind of in that even that younger age bracket under 35. Women also tend to be a little bit more, I would say, conflicted in terms of their vote. And it's interesting, we've always tracked the female voter very concerned about affordability. The inflationary impact really, they tend to be more responsible for the household budgets and the day-to-day kind of making ends meet sort of activities. And I think, the high inflation that we saw 2023 and 24 really got their attention. And so that's still an important factor. So that's got them sort of leaning conservative, but they're also worried about stability and sort of that sort of calmness that appeals to them, and it's well documented. Mr. Poilievre hasn't always done well with the female voter. He sometimes comes across as too aggressive. So I think that voter population is probably still really weighing their options in terms of these various conflicting things that are important to their vote.
Which demographic do you think will have the biggest impact on the outcome of this election?
It's a good question. Look, right now, if we were voting today, Ed, I'd say that it's probably going to be that 55 plus voter. They're a reliable voter. They turn out in numbers. Usually, that age group between 55 and let's say 80 turn out at over 70% in terms of the reliability. Critical vote. And right now, they have really turned heavily to the Liberal Party. They are really attracted by Mr. Carney and that stability message. So that's right now that's a key demographic that likely will dictate. The sleeper, I think, is really that 18 to 34, which again, I talked about how that 55-year-old vote has really swung Liberal. Well, the opposite has almost happened, Ed, with that 18 to 34 voter. They're supporting the Conservatives. They're much more about a change voter. They're not happy with the way things have gone the last 4 or 5 years. Buying a house for them has gotten further and further away. Lots of economic challenges. And so they're actually attracted to Mr. Poilievre's message of change and sort of the housing affordability message that he's brought in and some lower taxation. And now the challenge is, will they show up? In 2015, they did, and they made a big difference in that election. I'm not sure they show up to this same degree, but to me, that's a little bit of the wild card that could still sort of shake things up a little.
That's exactly where I was going to go to from a longtime radio guy. The 18 to 34 demographic is so hard to nail down. And they can always talk about, yeah, we want this, we want that. It's just a matter of will they go to the ballot box?
Exactly.
Are both the Liberals and Conservatives flirting with a majority right now?
The Liberals certainly are. The Conservatives, it's hard to see the path to majority for the Conservatives in this. What we haven't touched on, Ed, I'm sure you've talked about it in other interviews. I mean, the collapse of the NDP vote really is quite the another subplot to this whole campaign. They're polling single digits, which in a lot of regions that will favor the Liberals. Probably Atlantic Canada, it's worth a few extra seats. Ontario, particularly, it could be a rough night for the Conservatives in the GTA, that 905 area, if those splits don't work out for them, and that's often the case when the NDP vote collapses like this. But it's so I think the Liberals are probably have the easier path to the majority. For the Conservatives, I think right now they would be gunning hard to hold the Liberals to a minority situation and perhaps themselves get into a minority situation. But I think they need a bit more. Certainly, these polling numbers would need to change. Probably at least another couple of points in the Conservative favor before voting day. And to be honest, we just haven't seen that kind of movement in the polling. At least in our Leger polling, we haven't seen it.
All right, Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I always enjoy joining your program, Ed, and good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Andrew Enns is the Executive Vice President of Leger. The shift in support among Canadians has been dramatic. Will it last? Joining me is Richard Johnston. He's the Canada Research Chair in Public Opinion, Elections, and Representation, and emeritus at the Department of Political Science at the University of British Columbia. And Richard, why have the Conservatives been able to focus on Trudeau but not Carney?
I don't think there's a whole lot of political science that helps account for this phenomenon. I've been studying campaigns virtually my entire career, uh, including pretty close attention to the polls, and and in other countries, and I have never seen anything like this. Uh, there have been swift-ish recoveries of parties on the ropes, 1984, 1993, but never as swift as this, and never as sustained as this. The polls are tightening ever so slightly, but this is an unprecedented comeback by a party. And
And
I,
and what do
and
you
I have
think is
no
behind
advice for Mr. Poilievre.
that? We hear so much about U.S. style of elections, and this one right now is a two-horse race. What do you see as the long-term impacts on the other parties that are obviously vying for votes?
I think it really depends on what the winning party does once in office. And I think that if it's the Liberals, as seems likely, it's a pretty thin foundation for a party in power. Looks like they're going to get a majority, so they have their way. It's on them. They don't have to bargain with anybody else. It's really up to them to make the policies. Will they blow it? Um, if it is indeed the case that our relationship with the United States is forever transformed, then that itself would suggest that the party system is going to transform accordingly as well, because so much of our politics has been predicated on that relationship. And so if it's changed fundamentally, the structure of the party system may also change fundamentally. Then again, maybe it'll all go away, or maybe a liberal government will make some catastrophically bad choices and discredit itself, because I think if it does that, it doesn't have much else to stand on than how it delivers on the promise that's implicit in Carney's leadership, which is that he's good at this stuff, and particularly good at dealing with bad international actors.
We've got a week to go in this election. What do you expect in the run up to the vote?
I don't expect much at this point. I think if the Liberals were going to fall apart, they'd have done it already. Uh, the fact is that um, they did take some votes from the Conservatives at sort of by degrees. The Conservative Party is running maybe 7 points behind where it was at the beginning of the year, but most of the Liberal gains have come at the expense of everybody else. And I think for all for all that he's, I think, actually run a much better campaign than he's given credit for. I think Mr. Poilievre is up against the fact that large numbers of Canadians don't like him. They're actually afraid of him, and if not of him, of the people who are looking over his shoulder in the kind of mega parts of the Conservative Party. And so I don't see any serious mitigation of those concerns at this stage. If that was going to happen, it would have happened by now. And we're also far enough beyond the debates that I think that the system has essentially absorbed the debates. He had particularly good English debate. I don't think anybody doubts that he was, by a small margin, the best performer in the English debate. So he's done himself no particular harm, and even so, he's still behind. And the national polls disguise the fact that he's really behind in the places that are really most important in terms of turning votes into seats. That's parts of Ontario and parts of BC.
Are we talking about rural Ontario, rural BC?
Suburban. He's
Suburban.
way ahead in the rural parts of most provinces, in fact, outside of Atlantic Canada. The problem is the closely contested, ethnically diverse, pretty well educated ridings that ring the city of Toronto, the so-called 905, plus some similarly metropolitan places elsewhere in Ontario, and then Greater Vancouver. Again, the closely competitive places tend to be in the eastern and the southeastern parts of the metropolitan area. Um, the one extra consideration in BC is that this is the historic stronghold of the NDP. And although they have fallen off quite dramatically in BC, they're still stronger in BC than elsewhere. So this means that the Liberals can win seats with smaller total shares, actually, than in the 905. But it's Liberal support in general is a function of how metropolitan the place is. That's why Edmonton and Calgary are potentially in play, at least some of the districts. Um, but the places where the Conservatives are competitive with the Liberals historically are the suburban places. And by all accounts, regional polls suggest that they're well behind.
We've been hearing the phrase division, divided, the country's divided, whether it's, obviously in the US or Canada. But the way the numbers are looking right now as we head into the final week, it looks like Canada is pretty divided. Do you see it that way?
Yes. I mean, it's I don't know that it's more divided than it was last year, but the divisions that are in the electorate have been of long standing now. A big part of it is rural versus urban, with suburban obviously being in the middle on that one. There's a big regional divide, particularly the extractive industry parts of the country against secondary manufacturing parts. Uh, there's a division between along educational lines, and in some ways that's the most poisonous and worrisome of them all. That tends to overlap with geography as well. But over the last 25 years, I mean, basically in this millennium, uh, university educated people have tended to gravitate to the Liberals. Everybody else has fled the Liberals, and they've fled the Liberals basically for the Conservatives. And so we have a party of, sort of people who are very pleased with themselves, identify with sort of academic and cosmopolitan values, versus people who don't. And that's the prescription for a lot of the division in this country right now, and I don't see it going away soon. I think the fact that the country is under existential threat has mitigated some of those divisions. I'm struck by the number of friends and relatives who are basically on the conservative side of the street are really angry with the United States right now, and that has a kind of unifying quality to things. And we'll see going forward. It may turn out that much of the legislative agenda of a Carney government, if indeed it is a Carney government, the Conservatives will actually probably support. So that may have some mitigation. Um, Interesting question also, what happens inside the Conservative Party if they do lose?
Hmm.
Will Mr. Poilievre be given credit for strengthening the party, which he certainly has done, or will he get the blame for losing a fourth consecutive election for the party?
Do you have a prediction on what it's going to look like on Monday night?
I have to go with the polls. I know that there are doubts about polls, and we can talk about that if you want. Uh, there's a range of shares for the various parties in the polls. It's somewhat predictable by firm. Uh, but if you just look at the center of the whole distribution, um, the loss of ground by the Liberals over the last week is pretty minuscule. The regional numbers suggest that the Liberals are going to get a majority, and it doesn't really matter if it's a big majority or a modest majority. It looks like it's going to be a kind of old-fashioned working majority, not overwhelming, but not underwhelming either. So that would be my guess. Um, like a lot of people, I'm more anxious than I might have been 40 years ago about the representative character of polls. The industry has changed, but it's predictive. accuracy is actually pretty good over recent elections. So I have no basis really for doubting that.
Richard, I want to thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Richard Johnson is the Canada Research Chair in Public Opinion, Elections, and Representation and Emeritus at the Department of Political Science with the University of British Columbia. The advanced polls are done, and now it's a waiting game until Election Day. Marvin Ryder's with the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University, and he joins us now. And Marvin, have you ever seen such a turnaround in terms of the polls?
Well, the short answer is no, but that's because of two key events. First, the election of Donald Trump. You might have thought that was going to help Mr. Poilievre, but instead, because of what Mr. Trump has done since he was inaugurated, he's caused great fear in Canada, and anyone who seems to be at all aligned with Mr. Trump now has a negative halo around them. So that was good news. And then the second was the disappearance of Justin Trudeau. He, rightly or wrongly, became the lightning rod for everything that was wrong with the world at large. Everyone wanted to blame him. He steps aside, and then Mark Carney comes in. And the advantage to Mr. Carney is that he's not really been in government ever before. Yes, he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. Yes, he was the governor of the Bank of England, but he wasn't elected. You can't blame him for the last 10 years. So you have this, if you will, white knight riding over the hill, suddenly who's unbaggaged, doesn't have all of these negative things. And the fortunes turned on a dime. I never would have predicted this as little as 3 months ago, that this is what we would see. And I'll say this, Ed, I'll go out on a limb for you. We are on the edge of, I think, a Liberal majority government when the votes get counted next Monday. Could never have seen that coming.
No, that's for sure. You know, a surprise leading up to the English language debate was with the Green Party. It was kicked out because it didn't run candidates in 90% of the ridings. And it seemed to take, it took the Green Party by surprise, and it seemed to surprise some others. But is it a little hypocritical of the debate commission to do that, considering the bloc was there and runs obviously much fewer candidates?
Yeah, so the way I understand it, and I don't advise the election commission, they had three criteria and you had to meet two of them. One is that you had to be polling at least 4% in national opinion polls. And for that one, the Greens don't get a check mark, but the Bloc Québécois do get a check mark. You have to have at least one seat in the House of Commons. Both of them get a check mark for that. And then the third one is that you need to run enough candidates in enough ridings. Since the Green Party didn't qualify, and in fact, the Green Party reduced the number of candidates. At one point, they did have more candidates, and then they reduced the number of candidates to be strategic and say, well, let's focus our resources on the ridings where we might be competitive, we might have a chance to win. By then reducing their coverage, they didn't qualify on the third dimension. My problem isn't so much that they didn't qualify, but this isn't news. In other words, the election commission could have figured that out a week beforehand. Why spring it on the day of those debates that start with the French language debate? It did feel very last minute, and that's kind of bad form, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. When we look at this election, and let's face it, it's a two-horse race, but, you know, left in the dust are going to be the Green Party, the NDP, the People's Party of Canada, and possibly the Bloc. I'm wondering, are we heading towards just a two-party system here?
Well, in a way, we've always had a two-party system. There always ever really been two parties that could form the government. Even when the NDP became the official opposition, they were second, but second by a mile. They were quite a ways down there. We have the third party, so we have a center left, a center right, and then a little further left party as it goes. I think that's fine. I kind of like that. I like that in comparison to the American system, which really only has the two parties, and you're either with me or you're against me. I like that idea. But in this case, I think what we're seeing is the public perceiving, well, I don't want to overstate it, but I'll call it an emergency, given the way Mr. Trump has been behaving in his first 3 months in office. And so in those kinds of times, the fine points of a debate kind of get tossed out the door. You either go back to your home party on the left or your home party on the right. And I think that's what you're seeing here. It's not a war per se, but I think some of this mentality is what you would have seen during the Second World War. Let's not argue semantics on the edges. Let's just stay right down the middle as much as possible.
Elections Canada estimates about 2 million voted in the advanced polls. Does this favor any particular party?
Well, in a typical year, a lot of people rushing to the polls early is a symbol of change, that people want change. We want to get out there and get our vote heard because we want change. In this case, I'm not sure that bodes well for the Conservatives, even though they would be the party of change versus the Liberals who've been there for nearly a decade. You could still get change by voting for the Liberals because you got a completely different leader. And yes, I know that when he became prime minister, he put around him and his cabinet many of the same faces, but that was a short-term expedient kind of a thing. After the election, the dust settles, he'll form a new cabinet, and I'm sure there'll be lots of fresh faces in there as it goes. So I actually don't think this bodes poorly for the party in power. Normally it would, but this time around, I think it is just people saying, I want to get out there and vote. I've made up my mind. I think it's interesting that a lot of people voted before they saw the costed platforms of the Liberals, the NDP, and then just today, the Conservative Party. And I don't think people care. They really don't care on those things. I've got my flavor decided, and I want to get out there and exercise my franchise.
If Pierre Poilievre loses, do you expect him to resign?
Well, let me give you two scenarios. If it's close, in other words, if the Liberals let's say they just get a majority, but only by a seat or two, and the Conservatives have a big block opposing them, then I don't think he'll go. I think he'll stay around. Now, if the polls are wrong and if the Conservatives should be quite decimated, in other words, their seat count go down from where they are today, then he could very well step aside. And in that situation, we have somebody warming up in the bullpen to become the next leader of the Conservative Party. You might have heard of her. She's a premier in Alberta named Danielle Smith, who has been acting almost like the deputy Conservative Party leader of Canada. So, he could go, but I think if his numbers go up and if it's very, very close, I think he'll hang around for one more kick at the can.
And if Mr. Poilievre wins, does Mr. Carney stick around?
Well, that is the other question here. Let's assume that he doesn't win, but he also does get his seat in Nepean. So he is elected as an MP, but is not around. I think he would stay at least for one term. But let's also keep in mind this is a person who has much better prospects in the private sector. Whatever he might have been earning at Brookfield would pale in comparison to what the opposition leader is paid. So he might hear the siren song. And in that way, he might look like Michael Ignatieff, who stepped down and then left the country, went back, I think, to Harvard to teach, which was unfortunate, I think, because that really played into the mentality that he was just dropped in and really wasn't here. So I'm hoping Mr. Carney would stick around and face the music.
Marvin, I want to thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Marvin Ryder is with the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University. Our unpublished .vote question asks, which party will you vote for in the upcoming election? You can log on and vote right now. Don't forget to email your MP afterwards using our tool to tell them why you think what you do. All comments on the unpublished.ca website will be entered into a draw for a one-year membership to unpublished.ca. I want to thank our guests today on the Unpublished Cafe, Andrew Enns of Leger, Richard Johnson of UBC, and Marvin Ryder at McMaster. And thank you for watching the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand.